Kevin, Mike describes, without talking about the movies that you didn't like of his, this was a pretty quick yes?
Yeah, and Michael's a world-class writer, and he did send me 5 scripts between. I had such a nice.
But who's counting?
Yeah, that's right. Jesus. It's like so it was and because they were world-class scripts, they were just near misses for me. They were just near misses, and you want something to kind of stand out for you in a way that it's almost like seeing a UFO, and I think most of us are glad if we have never seen a UFO, because it would ruin the rest of our life, because for the rest of our life we have to tell our friends, so this UFO, and everybody goes, oh, poor Kevin, poor, do you know what happened to Bob? He saw a UFO. I mean, and so I've seen some things like this in my life. I've seen Dances with Wolves. I saw Field of Dreams. I saw an American movie called Bull Durham. And I saw this little movie called Black or White. And it spoke out loud to me because like the nation, I've struggled with this subject. We all struggle with how delicate this thing is, and we don't seem to be able to have this conversation. And the genius, I think, of Mike's writing was he put it in the mouth of a drunk, of a grandfather who was fighting for the last connection to the 2 women he loved the most, his wife and his daughter. And it gets dirty at the end. And Mike wrote such an even-handed screenplay that I was stunned. And when I was done reading it, I felt like I had a better handle about how to have this discussion. Wow. I played baseball my whole life, and when James Earl Jones actually gave that great speech in Field of Dreams, I felt different about baseball. Right. And when I heard Mike's speech about, it's not my first thought that counts, it's my second and my third and my fourth that ends up defining whether or not I'm a racist, and it helped me. And sometimes movies can do that. Movies can live forever because they move us because of a great romance, because of a kiss, because of action, because of laughter, comedy. And once in a while, a movie can get under your skin, and sometimes a movie can help you wrestle with a subject that you haven't been able to get a handle on. And Mike did that, and that's no simple thing. And so when I saw it, I knew that we would make it, and I thought the town would come rushing to make this movie, and it didn't happen. But I'd made Mike a promise that we would, and so I walked down the hall one morning, and I'd like my wife to stand up for a second. Christine, would you stand up, please? And I walked down the hall, and she was in our den, and I said, Chris, I promised Mike we'd make this movie, and I think we're going to have to pay for it. And she said, what? And I said, I think we're going to have to pay for it. And I said, it reminds me of everything it is I love about movies. I said, I happen to think it's highly entertaining. And she just simply said to me, she didn't think about all our security, what in the world. She just said, if you really want to do this, then I think that that's what you should do. So I told her later I was going to go build a cornfield right after that. But I know Chris never seeks the limelight, but I thought it was important that she stood up because as my partner, she said, I'll back you in making this movie. So it was the 5th screenplay. I believed in it, and we made it.
Mike, I want to hear a little bit about what happened in your life that inspired you to write this movie.
Well, it was inspired by real events in my life. My wife, who's here also, her sister died when she was 32 of AIDS, and she had a little 7-year-old boy who was a biracial boy and who didn't have a relationship with his father, but he had a great relationship with his grandmother and his aunts and his cousins. And Diane really took him in and was involved with raising him. And so I, being her husband, I helped, but really she did the work. And he was part of our family and still is to this day. And he's an amazing man now. He's 34 years old. But the inspiration was that he had a family down in South Central, and we lived in Santa Monica, and they were two completely different worlds. And everybody in both worlds saw him as either black or white, and he never saw himself as anything other than just a little kid, and he didn't see any fascination with the fact, and I thought one day that'd be a good way to tell the story about what's going on and how hard it is to talk about what's going on away from the police and the news and the politicians and the guns, and the helicopters, right down on the earth, a story about a family, but really a story about race,
And Octavia, I'll ask you this question. This feels like a movie that, had it been told 10 years ago, would be totally different. There's something about this moment in time that changes the conversations that we're having about this film, conversations we're having about a lot of things.
For me, I don't know that the conversation would be different, because when I read it, I just loved the symmetry in both worlds. We had two families, both dealing with some sort of addiction, both dealing with some sort of trauma, but at the center of it was everybody loved this child. And so for me, the family part would always be first, and that's just kind of the way that I, see things. But I do get that race is it is a conversation that is danced around, and I love the fact that Mike and Kevin, were brave enough to say, you know what, this is a conversation that needs to be had, and what a wonderful introduction or an entree to begin it. But for me, I just love that at the end of the day, it was about the love of this child and how broad her world could be with both families.
Mike, is that
can I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
In prep, Kevin said something that I really always said. The idea was never to make a movie that was the conversation. Idea was to make a movie that started conversation. Mm-hmm. The idea was, he'd say, you want to make a movie that people go have a cup of coffee afterwards. Because a lot of times nowadays, I feel like you go to movies and you just go home and you get on your phone or your iPad, and you don't really discuss the movies anymore.
You get on your phone during the movie. You've been to the theaters. I've been. When you were talking about the movie, though, I'm going to pick up on something Octavia was talking about. Did you talk about it as a movie about a family, and more so or equally so about that as opposed to a movie about race?
Well, both. But the world changed. I want to say, one thing about Kevin, early on, there was a thing where, right while we were shooting the movie, Paula Deen, her whole kind of world fell apart. Like that, while we were shooting it, and the George Zimmerman thing was going on, and there was a lot of talk about, should Kevin really use the N-word that way in a movie, and should we shoot an alternative? And he was like, there's no way. Right. I'm not even shooting an alternative because I don't want to ever use it, and the fact is, because it really wasn't about that. It was, so I think that, it's just one of those things where you just go, okay, just stay with the original vision, even though the world, because everything that's happened that everyone throws up right now about, God, it's weird that you made this movie in the time of, none of that happened before we made this movie. Ferguson and George Zimmerman and all that.
Well, I think it's proof that for the people who believe we're in a post-racial world, we're not.
Right.
Kevin, I'm going to talk about the scene, the courtroom, this monologue, however you want to describe it. When you're reading the script for the first time and you're making kind of all sorts of decisions about the movie, do you glom onto certain scenes? Do you see that scene? Is that something you talk about in your earliest conversations with Mike about how that scene is going to work in the film?
Well, I've had quite a life in the movies, and I've loved every minute of it. And it doesn't mean it hasn't been a life bruised. I've taken some big bites out of life, and life's taken some big bites out of me. But I keep coming back to the movies, and I have a romance with them. And I remember seeing Spencer Tracy in Inherit the Wind, and thought he wasn't afraid of the language And you know, I play action movies sometimes, and you know, anybody that does action movie, they want less words. But my roots go back to these guys, and I thought one day I'm going to get a speech like that, and I'm not going to cut out a word. And I got it in JFK. I got a little speech in Bull Durham about the small of a woman's back, you know, and I've had some speeches in my life, and when I read this thing that Mike wrote, it's no small thing. You could take 100 of the best writers in Hollywood to tackle this subject, and I don't know that anybody would come up with such an American point of view that Mike has done. So it's no small feat. And I just, when I realized how good it was, I also realized that I was the person that could screw it up. And because I was the one that was going to have to deliver it. And it's now your speech, because it helped me. And when he said, you know, he's never once apologized to my wife, I didn't know I was going to bubble up emotionally there. But that was at its core. Sometimes all we need in life is an apology. Something deep down that was like at its core. Right. And it was a beautiful American speech. It's a very American screenplay. And I wasn't going to, I'm kind of like I'm pretty fierce about things. And one of them is about intent. And I don't like audiences telling us what to do with our movies. I wanted you to see this in the dark and its purity with all the words. I wasn't afraid of any of the words in this movie. I was afraid to not say them. And so I got to thank Mike for that speech, because no matter what, I have it forever. And if it somehow informs you in your life, that's why actually deep down in my heart, I actually thought it could.